Okay, 5.3, solving quadratic equations by graphing and factoring. We are actually going to find zeros, and the zero of a function is where it crosses the x-axis. Okay, so it's where the value of x where y equals 0, or f of x equals 0. Okay, quadratic functions have two zeros, and they're symmetric about the axis of symmetry. So the first thing we're going to do is use a table, and then when we go to the graphing we're just going to use Desmos. So graphing the function, find the zeros first by using a graph for a table. So the first thing we need to do is find or graph this, and we graph it like we did in those last sections. Find our A is positive, so it opens upward. Then we're going to do our opposite of B over 2A. And we can substitute that value in. Make sure you use parentheses when you square, or you'll get a wrong value. Negative 1 squared is 1. Minus 2 is negative 1. Minus 3 is negative 4. So my vertex is at negative 1, 4. My axis of symmetry is x equals negative 1. So we can plot those points, negative 1, negative 4. My y-intercept is negative 3. So the next thing I might want to do, so we have this table. And I know at negative 2, it's at negative 3. Negative 1 is negative 4. And we know at 0, it's at negative 3. So I might want to test negative 3 and 1. So negative 3 is nine. Minus 6 is 3, minus 3. So there is one of our zeros. And the other one, since it's symmetric, should be also at 0. So if I put 1 in there, 1 squared is 1, plus 2 times 1 is 2, is 3, minus 3 is 0. So that does work. So my zeros are negative 3 and 1. Originally, when I did these notes, we used graphing calculators. Method 2 is just going to be Desmos. And you should get the same points, negative 3, 0, 1, 0. So go ahead and try to check it out. And again, I would definitely make sure you know how to do it mathematically. And check using Desmos. So if you graph this longhand like you should have, it's downward, and you find that your zeros are -3 and 1. How can you identify the zeros of a quadratic function from a table? So from a table, it's f of x equals 0, and from a graph, where graph crosses the x-axis. Okay, so we can also find zeros using algebra. So if we have f of x equals x squared plus 2x minus 3, we can set the function equal to 0, and then solve that algebraically by factoring, or as in a later section, the quadratic formula. When we do it setting it equal to 0, now instead of calling zeros, and we can find these roots again by setting our function equal to 0 and keeping in mind that either product or either factor can be 0 for our whole product to be 0, and that's what this in the middle here is, that zero product property. So when you factor, either factor can be 0 for the whole thing to be 0. So that is what we're going to do. We're going to first set our function equal to 0. We're going to look at the left-hand side. Can we factor it? Which you did some practice on factoring. I have a minus plus, so I know it needs to be 2 minuses. And factors of 12 that add up to 8 is 6 and 2. And then you set each factor equal to 0 and solve. And there are zeros. Okay, so let's look at the next one. First step, set the function equal to 0. Next step, factor. Set each factor equal to 0. And then solve. Okay, so you have 2 on the next page to try. Pause the video and then check your answers. Hopefully you were able to get those. How can you use the factor form of quadratic equation to find the zeros of a related function? You set each factor equal to 0. Okay, so this ends day 1. So we'll start day 2.